Okay, I wanted to concentrate this episode on something that I feel like has been one of the most important parts of my healing process and why I think it's so important. So, sharing my own story from, those childhood years um, has made a huge impact on how I've been able to process my story. Now, back in the day, I didn't know, that it was doing that for me, but I found, some old writings that I thought would be fun to share. This is from November 1st, 1971. And I don't know if you can see the little handwriting. That's my handwriting as a 9-year old. And, it's talking about my dad, and we're having this family night experience, and I'm talking about who did the opening song, and we sang "When Daddy Comes Home." That was a song we would sing, "When Daddy comes home," we climb up on his knee, we pat his cheeks and hold him close, and anyway, it's a really sweet little song about your dad. And so, mom, it says she gave a good lesson to honor thy father. I don't know what, it must have all been on a father theme. And then Karen conducted our home evening. Susan had a special musical number, and then we sang dad's favorite song, "Do As I'm Doing," which was "Do as I'm doing, follow, follow me. Do as I'm doing, follow, follow me. If I do it high or low, if I do it fast or slow, do as I'm doing, follow, follow me." And so we would do all these funny actions, and you could go on your tippy toes or go down on the floor. It was just fun. Anyway, and when we took these notes in this little spiral, little just a little steno notebook, I mean, just nothing special. I had no idea that I would find this years later and be able to look through it, and all of those special family nights that we had together, most of them were the year right before. Anyway, it was right around the time that the Birchtolds moved in to our area, but this reminds me of how innocent and how much fun we had as a family. It says that Jan gave um, the dessert out. We always made a special dessert. And our treat was my mother finished writing and what the treat was. I guess she wanted to make sure that we got it right. So I know her handwriting. So she writes in that the treat was of a chocolate pudding cake and a small decorated cake for each sister. So I made them and I made each sister, each one of us got a special cake and it was a chocolate pudding cake. Anyway, mom wrote that in there to make sure that I got credit for that. And I look back on just a sweet little, this is just what you would call what, just basic, um, you know, writing down the facts of what happened on this night in November 1st, 1971. But how precious when I found this notebook, and it's full of these family night notes. And some are written by me, and some are written by Karen or Susan or mom or dad. And so, as I have thought about how we tell our life story, I came across also this life history that I wrote. And this was in college after everything had happened. And you can see it's typewritten. If you're watching, it's all typewritten. It's got lots of, white out and different notes written in pen all over the typewritten page. I didn't have a computer back in those college days. And, as I went through this little first time that I was asked to write a life history, it it took something. It was quite a few pages long, and it was supposed to kinda start when I was born and then just concentrate on a particularly, important time of my life, and that's the first time that I ever wrote down what had happened to me about my kidnapping and the sexual assault, and this is Sexual Assault Month, to, remember and to talk about how imprinting that kind of assault is on our lives, and how much there is to do in the aftermath of healing from sexual trauma and assault as young people or at any age, but especially I think as a child or a young person tween that is trying to fit in and figure out who they are in life. So that became another very important time. those writing things down, and then I kept a journal for a lot of years. I kept that little diary that I've used and I've shown people so much that it's falling apart and it's being repaired and trying to make sure we have copies of all of the pages in it. Um, and then as I was getting ready and preparing for a speaking engagement, I just wrote very briefly, you know, about my story, just, on a computer that printed this lovely thing out, that looked so nice, and that my story, was important to tell for me, whether it I hoped it would help other people, but I didn't have any knowledge of that impact. I just knew in telling my story that that would somehow put it outside of my body and I'd be able to study it and learn from it. So, one of the things that I did at a retreat that a really great company puts on, it's called Saprea, Saprea. I went to a retreat. It's just like 4 days, 4 or 5 days, 3 or 4 nights at this beautiful, beautiful cabin home. And they only take like 12 people at a time. And you have to be female and a sexual abuse survivor of child sexual abuse, and you have to not be in a place where maybe you would harm yourself or others, right? Can't be in that space because we know that those are some of the various, places that people go depending on where they're at in their own journey and their healing journey. And what we did at that retreat, which was extraordinary, first of all, just all the pieces of that puzzle. But one of the things we did is we did an exercise that was called shame resilience, rewriting your shame story. And I had never heard resilience framed in that way. I've studied and tried to be resilient and I've come to understand how important resilience and building resilience is, but I had never heard it called shame resilience. And so um what we did is we challenged our story instead of the negative belief like I am not enough. What would be an alternative thought that challenges your shame voice? So that voice in your head that's always saying, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'll never be good enough, whatever. And I wrote down this: the most powerful relationship you will ever have is the relationship you have with yourself. And that was said, has been said, that isn't my own quote, but that was a quote that I had heard and it had stuck with me. And that really showing myself more compassion and allowing myself to be enough, like in my own mind, every time that thought would creep in, that I could change that thought and writing it down, um, that I could actually actively rewrite my shame story. I started to write all kinds of things. Like, who would I reach out to share my experience with? And of course, I wrote down, my son, Austin, my mom, Susan, Karen, Caroline, Jan, other people in my life that have been there for me throughout my life, and some of my other friends. I wrote their names on here. Um, and then that I could extend self compassion, warmth, and kindness, and some deep understanding to myself, in instances where I am feeling inadequate, where I feel like I'm failing or suffering in some way. And, it's interesting how even after a whole 9-part series came out on my story and I got to help produce it, how much I've struggled in the last month or two of like, you know, all the things that I'm doing, I feel like it's building so slowly and I want to help, millions of people. And yet I have to be more kind and understanding and say, but if there's just 30 or 40, or 50 people that are helped, it still was totally worth it. But it's funny how much you can feel like you're kind of a failure, even when you have big things that have happened in your life. So, just as I have, all through my life struggled with this, this shame thing that is there when you have gone through this kind of trauma and abuse. And um, I just thought maybe if I could share just for a minute um, how to how to show yourself more compassion and more grace. and how important in telling your story that that those little moments of writing things out and allowing yourself to see things outside of your body really does make a difference in your healing. So, in our human experience, we do suffer. And no matter what your suffering is, there can be shame associated with it. And so, if we can feed ourselves, because we have to do this for ourselves, we can hear the things that other people say, their compliments or their, affirmations to us, acknowledgments. But in the end, we have to feed our self compassion and self care. And so, when there's a huge wave of shame that overcomes you in your life, and then when you really parse it out and go, but what happened wasn't my shame, it wasn't my fault, you can rewrite those feelings of shame by being very, very, getting close to the source of where that shame came from. And so for me, that became a part of writing down my story and then eventually sharing my story out loud with people. Now, today we have words for this. I just stumbled on this as part of my healing journey because, I was searching all the time. I've been searching all my life. How can I be better? How can I be happier? How can I have less shame? How can I have more confidence? All of the things that um, I think most people want, but a lot of times we don't know how to get them. And so now we have come upon this narrative therapy, and it's something that I think people need to know a little bit about. So narrative therapy is a respectful, non-blaming approach to counseling, to community work, something that centers people as the experts in their own life. And so as I look back, I'm like, that's what was happening. I was becoming an expert in my own life. And so that narrative therapy, by definition, it involves talking about your problems as well as your strengths. And a therapist can help you explore your dominant story. For me, it was a lack of self confidence and a lot of shame and wanting to be perfect and a perfectionist. And so these were my dominant stories. And that therapist or somebody that does narrative therapy can help you um, understand your dominant story, like in depth. And I think one of the things that really interests me in why I tell people that the breakthrough of telling your story, whether you write it and you only, share it with yourself or maybe a close friend, your writings, or when you tell somebody and it has to be a safe person that will believe you, not judge you, and not blame you. That's important. Don't just tell it to anybody. Not all people have the capacity to listen in that way. But that form of therapy, that narrative therapy, it really does aim to separate like the individual from the problem. So that the individual, for myself, for example, we we externalize the issues rather than internalize them. So, it relies on your skills, the individual's skills and their sense of purpose. Like my sense of purpose has to guide me through the tough times, through the difficulties in my life. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in having guides like a therapist, or some people have, a yoga instructor, or others might have a spiritual guide, or they read certain books, or they keep themselves in a headspace where they have meditation or things like that that help to guide their thinking, their narrative. But I do think that the idea behind narrative therapy, where you are relying on your own skills and your own sense of purpose to guide you, that you are becoming the expert in your own life, is a really powerful idea. And it's really what happened to me when I um, did some of these different exercises from being age 9, and then in my early college, university years when I had to write that life, history, but concentrate on a certain time period, and that was the time period of my kidnappings and abuse that I chose to, really concentrate on, and that opened up things that I could never have expected would happen for me. I think, there's a lot of different examples about narrative therapy, but now that there's a name for it and that knowing that there are people who can actually, help guide you through some of these exercises and these things, I think is a really powerful thing. So, like, let's say that somebody has, social anxiety, really bad anxiety. And so they want to rewrite that story, like the shame story that I rewrote. That was an exercise that, we did, and I went beyond just the exercise that we did that in that short period of time at that retreat, which I just did like a year ago. I'm still doing things. I do things all the time to try and, become, smarter, stronger, to be more loving, kind, forgiving. I mean, I'm always working on, those kinds of things. And most of it is because I know that, you don't ever stay in one place. You're either moving forward or you're kind of sliding backwards. So if somebody has this really terrible anxiety, so to rewrite the story is, first of all, you have to separate that anxiety from the person, from the individual. So instead of you saying, okay, let's say that my name is Suzanne, and saying, I have anxiety. I am a loser. You reframe that and you say, this anxiety tricks me into thinking that I'm a loser. So that narrative, just by changing the way you say something in your own head or to yourself in the mirror, can literally change how you feel. It will truly like regroove something in your brain, in your mind, in your heart, in your central nervous system. Things change. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about why telling our stories is so important. And I know in my online community, Thrivivors, we almost always have somebody sharing their story or an aspect of how their story influenced them, or a family member who was also impacted by um, the abuse of their loved one. And so when we tell those stories, you know, what happens is there's a freedom that comes, because having that narrative outside of your body and then being able to reframe it so that you can be more compassionate to yourself, more understanding to yourself, because you can see it sort of in black and white, whether you write it or you speak it, it becomes more clear. And so I just want to encourage people that are out there thinking, well, how do you start? Well, the first thing you can do is you can start by just keeping a silly spiral notebook by your bedside, on the little table, or on your kitchen table, or wherever you sit down and or lay down, or wherever the thoughts come, where you might have some negative self-talk going on in your head. And maybe that comes in lots of places. In the bathroom, I keep a notebook in my bathroom. um, you know, we hold no secrets here. And I write things down. And it was the one place where I knew I would always go. I would be there for at least, a few 30 seconds or more. And it was easy for me to grab my little notebook and write something in it. I did my gratitude journal often. I would leave it in the bathroom instead of by my bedside table, because sometimes I was so tired at night. And because it was in the bathroom, I would go there several times a day, and I would be thinking, oh gosh, I've got to write something in here, something I'm grateful for. I got to start looking, because, I've run out of the obvious things. I got to be looking for something new. So as you do that, as you focus a little bit of your time on some narrative type of work and therapy, when you can start to understand your own story and how your emotions, your actions, your problems fit into the context of that story, you are like becoming your own um, psychiatrist or therapist or counselor. You are looking at, oh, I'm understanding my own story and I'm talking about it. And as I pull it apart, I understand my actions, my emotions, my problems, how they fit into the narrative. And so, because the context of your story is unique to you, you are also the only one who can take action to, fix the problems, to take certain actions, because healing from trauma is not just free. It's not like, oh, I want to heal and therefore I am healed. It doesn't have to be necessarily hard and grueling, although healing from trauma can be that at times. You could play it more like a game. Like, I'm going to write something down or speak about something that shifts my narrative in one small aspect that keeps coming up for you in your life. For me, shame was a big one. And so, because I've made so many mistakes since all of that happened, I've made a million mistakes that I now look at and I can see those things. They were problems that were contextualized from my story and from some of the natural development that I missed out on. And so I I just encourage people to maybe, do a little search, find there's some really good exercises that you can do. There's one from Positive Psychology that is called the 19 Best Narrative Therapy Techniques. And it's a worksheet, it's completely free. So you can go to positivepsychology.com and then look up narrative therapy. And there is this worksheet. It's just, you can print out the PDF and start working on some narrative therapy techniques. So if you imagine your life story where you're the hero, it's your life. You are the hero in your own life story rather than the victim. How would that change your experience of life? So if you can be the hero and imagine the narrative of you being the hero in your life instead of the victim in your life, your story, what happened, happened, but your story about it and the story you tell yourself, the story you tell to others will change profoundly. And of course, it depends on, lots of different factors. But I can tell you that by telling my story, my life has changed profoundly. And by rewriting certain aspects of my story, like the shame aspect, like the I have to be perfect aspect, I have many of those things that I have rewritten, whether that was by, pen or computer or in a diary, or it was by actually speaking those things out loud and deciding I actually am going to figure out how to be a happier, less critical person. And I'm going to do it because I want to be the hero in my story. I want to be the happiest person in the room. I want to be a person who is not a victim. I want to be somebody who is thriving in their life. But I had to break things down in such a way that I could pause and consider, okay, what is the story that I am telling about myself, about my life? And even though I'm telling the story that happened in the 70s, my whole goal is to help people let out that story and be able to kind of recreate a happy childhood. Even if they didn't have it then, you can have it now. You know, if you could rewrite your story, your narrative, I believe you could have a happier, healthier life. And it's just the first step, I think, in that journey of healing that is really, really powerful. So, Um, I guess the goal that I wanted to bring out in this solo episode is that there are opportunities for your growth and development. You can absolutely find meaning out of the ashes, out of the fire. Like I think about when my dad's store burned to the ground along with, a bunch of other businesses in that building in old historic downtown Pocatello. And I'm like, wow, he didn't quit and we didn't quit. No matter how hard life got, we got up. Every person has to pull their pants on one leg at a time. They have to roll themselves out of bed. You're going to bark, Toby. My dog is barking. He's ready to go outside. I'm almost done, Toby. And if you realize that you can sort out your thoughts and your feelings. So if you feel wronged, something happens and you feel so offended or so hurt or so wronged by someone. In my case, it was this terrible, abuse and emotional torture and I felt so wronged. But I felt wronged by other people throughout my life. But that one was especially traumatic. But to think through, your feelings about that and to sort out your thoughts about it. Your stories organize those thoughts. Those stories help you find meaning in what happened to you. They help you find purpose, certainly has for me. And we can reestablish our identity through telling a little bit different story. I hope that that's helpful. Um, so when we talk about our lives, when we talk about our past, if we can do it from the point of view that we are narratively rewriting our current story of who we are today, who we are in this room today. Am I thoughtful? Am I kind? Am I loving? Am I honest? Am I really doing myself a favor by how I'm acting in this room at this point today and looking at the way we talk about our lives and about ourselves and about our experiences? I really believe that it absolutely moves us forward on the path. So, anyway, as we move towards healing and personal development, it really does revolve around the stories that we tell ourselves and others. So, start telling your story and then start examining, how can I actually do certain exercises or things that can rewrite my story in a way that will be helpful to my own life first and foremost, and then maybe to the lives of others. All right. Thanks for listening. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show. This really helps us spread the word. And if you know someone who would benefit from listening to our show, please do me a favor and share one of our episodes with them. I want every survivor to know that they are not alone and that there is help available. Links to my website, our foundation, the new book, our online community, Thrivivors, and newsletter can be found in the show notes. All of my contact info is there as well. This year, my number one focus is on sharing our stories. This is so important because it's the launching pad to our healing journey, and it inspires the survivor who is still suffering in silence. I don't want anyone to suffer alone anymore. So please reach out. I want to hear from you. Until next time, my friends, this is Mama Jan signing off. Over and out on 2.